Hello, my name is Joy Usher. I'm an astrologer and have been for 30 years. I may have met some of you through previous years of working with SATA and workshops, but I'm absolutely excited. It's a very small word to say how much I'm looking forward to working with you this year. I wanted to do a little bit of a background on, not on myself, but looking at a chart. So what I'm going to do is, enough about me. I'm going to share the screen and I'm going to work with these charts here, which is the chart of Yoko Ono. So hopefully you can see this very clearly. One of the ways that students, not just students for SATA, but students that we've had through the years, is to say, we know all the basics, we've learned it all, we know all the bits and pieces, but how do we put it together? So there's kind of an idea that students have that there is a formula that you can put something together and always follow this process of do this and then do this and then look at that and then follow it in this way. So they're looking for, I suppose they're looking for a logical way to step through a chart. But I really have to say that each chart is like a piece of music. Each chart has its own unique pattern. So it's more about learning how to change the notes and how to change the flow of the music that you see in a chart than it is to say, always do this. So, I've heard people say, you must start with the luminaries, you must start with the sun, you must start with the ascendant. No, you've got to do the midheaven. But I really have to say each one will have its own flow. And part of the work of an astrologer is to say, can I tap into this energy? Can I understand what's going on here? So I'm going to take this chart for Yoko Ono, and I'm going to go through the process of how I would look at it and to think about, okay, where would I start? What would I look at next? What is a real process for me? Because you don't always get the opportunity in the time that you spend with a client or when you're looking at any particular chart to cover absolutely everything. That's not what this is about. It's saying, what is important now? What do I need to look at this moment? So I'm going to look at this chart and I'm going to kind of go through the process of what I would do just with this chart, and you'll follow it along with me, I'm sure. Having said that, but there's no formula and nowhere that I would particularly start, I'm inclined to always start with sect. I'm inclined to look at the sect of the chart. Is it a daytime chart? Is it a nighttime chart? Were they born during the day or were they born during the night? So, excuse me, itchy nose. So what I've got here with Yoko Ono's birth is the 18th of February, 1933. Yoko Ono, she's now, she's turned 90. Unfortunately, we don't see her anymore. She is alive, but she suffers from dementia. So that her son, Sean, manages all her affairs and hopefully that she is at peace. She's had a long and eventful life. She's had a life of tragedy. She's had a life of joys, ups and downs. She's been a performance artist. She's been the wife of the Beatle, John Lennon. She's brought her own creative work into being. She's born her own music and also Lennon's music into creation. So she's had a lot of years and a long life. So I wanted to have a look at this chart because I think it's an interesting chart. They're all interesting. Okay, so she's born during the night at 8:30 at night. So we have the sun below the horizon. We have the sun in the last degree of Aquarius in detriment. I don't particularly spend a lot of time working on last degrees. I don't know that they are critically important. I haven't seen a lot of work that says, well, we have to pay more attention. The only reason I would say late degrees are interesting is because of the terms or the bounds, because usually the last 5 degrees or 4 degrees of any sign is owned by the malefics, either by Mars or by Saturn. So it's always interesting to have a look at the term ruler for a particular planet if it's anywhere. So we know that it's a nighttime chart. So we therefore know that the planets that are going to be most at ease, and I'm going to spend a lot of time, and I know that you will have done sect. I know that you know the principles. I know that, you've looked at how to define them, how to find them, what's the first rule, what's the second rule, what's the third rule. But I'm hoping that I'm going to be working with you in a way that incorporates it in your delineation. It's all very well to know the theory, but you need to be thinking about how this works. So I'll be leaning heavily into SET. For instance, if you're looking at Yoko Ono's chart, then her nocturnal planets are going to be, her main luminary is going to be her moon. So if I'm delineating this chart, the first thing that I'm going to probably look at is to say, what is the moon ruling and what is the moon doing in this chart? And you can see here that we have Cancer on the midheaven. We have the moon down here in Sagittarius. It's in the 3rd house. Oh, I didn't mention that on my left-hand side of the chart on the left is the Placidus chart. It's a quadrant house system. It's very even in her chart because we have an ascendant of 8 degrees Libra and we have a midheaven of 9 degrees Cancer. So it's very, very evenly based on those 30-degree increments. And you can see even as it goes around, 5 degrees, 6 degrees, 5 degrees, 8 degrees, they're very, very evenly spaced house cusps. But I will always throw a chart into whole sign as well, because I want to know what the movement is, So let's go back to our nocturnal planets. We've got the moon down here and it's ruling the midheaven. Now, you might kind of consider that there is a quincunx kind of feeling between the moon in the 3rd house and the 10th house, which is not normally Sagittarius and Cancer would, you'd look at them and think, oh, I don't know if these are valid, if the moon can see this midheaven, if it's in charge of the sign of Cancer, if we've got a relationship between this. But I use the rules of Anticia and contra Anticia. So I'm willing to say I know that the sign behind Cancer will bring in a Anticia or contra Anticia, and the sign opposite will bring in either an Anticia or a contra Anticia. So I'm quite happy with the fact that the moon in Sagittarius is capable of dealing with the midheaven. And in fact, the midheaven is a very important place for Yoko Ono because this moon is in charge of the chart. So we have the whole idea of her direction is driven by this moon. Her desire to be out there and to be physically engaged with the world is concerned with this 10th house, that this moon is wanting to use some sort of service or care statement, a nourishment statement, that this is very important to her, that not only will the MC nourish her moon, but that she gives something of service back to the world. This is very important to her. So that's the relationship, I would say, between the moon in Sagittarius and the midheaven. Now, one of the things that I will be teaching in detail, and I know that you have a course on Moon Kai, but if we come across it in a chart, I'm not going to look the other way. And I will say for Yoko Ono that her moon in Sagittarius is Moon Kai in contention. So if you haven't come across contention before, I will say this is a nocturnal planet, the moon. It's in a sign of Sagittarius. Sagittarius belongs to Jupiter. So the moon is in a sign which belongs to a planet from the opposite sect. Now, there's a lot of this that's coming out now in the translations about same-sect rejoicing. It's a term that's being used. Benjamin Dykes uses it. Robert Schmidt used it. In this idea of same-sect rejoicing is to say, we belong in the same sect. We are going to get along. So even though I might say, wow, okay, the sun is in the sign of Aquarius, it's in detriment, we know that, it's opposite the sign of Leo, but its dispositor is Saturn. So we would say that the sun is in the same sect rejoicing situation because it's in a sign which belongs to another diurnal planet. So we know that even though the sun is in detriment, we know that the sun is rejoicing because the planet which is looking after it is going to be Saturn. And then we look at Saturn, and Saturn is in rulership, so it's strong. So we know that there's a good relationships between Saturn and the sun in this chart, and this is something that is missing for the moon. It's not in a sign that belongs to a nocturnal planet. It's not in the sign of Venus. It's not in the sign of Mars. It's not even in the sign of Mercury, which is behind the sun here and is a nocturnal Mercury. It's in the sign of Jupiter. So we have this kind of upset for the moon already that then has to go, okay, you're my dispositor, you come from a different place, you come from a bit different mindset, you come from a different sect. And then we go to Jupiter and we say, what's happening to Jupiter? First of all, we know it's in Virgo. So we know that it is in detriment. It's in the sign belonging to Mercury. And we know that its rulership is Pisces and that Virgo is opposite that. We can see that it's retrograde. So we're starting to see some wobbly things here for the moon. We're starting to see crossing sect. We're starting to see its dispositor is in detriment. We're starting to see its dispositor is retrograde. And then when we look at Mercury, this wouldn't be a problem for the moon if Mercury was in front of the sun, if it rose before the sun, but it's not. It's around here and it's behind the sun. So we have the problem that Mercury is nocturnal. We go from a nocturnal planet, the moon, to a diurnal planet, Jupiter, detriment, retrograde, to a nocturnal planet over here. So we use the word that Alberuni's translation uses, and it talks about contention. There is something contentious about this moon. So we know there's something contentious, not just about the third house moon, but about the house that it rules. Something about Yoko Ono's career is contentious. It upsets people. It challenges them. It unnerves them. It makes them feel uncomfortable. It's all of these things. And it's nothing that she's doing, although sometimes there is that sense of I'm taking this action, because part of her work and her artwork was really about unsettling people. When she did her performance art, now performance art is a type of art which was very, very popular in the 60s and the 70s. I probably still is around, but it was this idea of an artist expressing themselves and bringing in the audience with them and saying, I want you to participate. I want you to be part of this act. So there are certain acts that she had which were very confrontational. I'll talk about them at the end of this. But there was this sense of saying, you know, this is artwork. This is not strange. This is not weird. This is how you perceive something creative. So there was always that part of Yoko Ono's work that was a little bit different, a little bit confrontational, and a little bit disturbing for her audience. And that's where this moon comes into. The moon also, because we're talking about the moon here, we're also aware that there's a statement here about her mother and her relationship with her mother. Not just because we have the moon here and we know it's in contention, but because we have the 10th house, which is the moon's house. Now, one of the things I'm going to be teaching in the course coming up this year is I'll be focusing on parents, or I'll be focusing on the family, or be focusing on the children, or all the bits and pieces that bring together a family. So this is part of what we will look at when we're looking at and we're concentrating on that first unit that we do when we're talking about parents. So we'll spend a lot more time on this. We will be looking at it and saying, okay, how do we define it? Where do we put it? All the rest of it. So I'm just kind of gliding over this a little bit so that you're following, hopefully, how I would look at this chart and how would I interpret Yoko Ono's chart in this way. So I know that this is mother's house, the 10th house, and that the planet ruling it is the moon, mother, and that there is contention here. Yoko Ono's mother was a very high part of high society in the Japanese world. She was a traditional woman. She was a traditional wife. She spoke different dialects. She was highly educated. She played traditional instruments. She wore traditional dress. She was an icon for her generation. So to have this firstborn daughter who was so different who was so confrontational, who was an embarrassment to her, was part of the reason why the mother and the daughter were estranged for years. They couldn't get along, they couldn't find common ground. Yoko wanted to be accepted desperately by her mother, but her mother would kind of say, well, you know, if you were just a dutiful daughter, if you would just behave yourself, if you would just do what you're told, if you didn't do all these outlandish, outrageous things, then it wouldn't be a problem. But that's not Yoko. Okay, so I would concentrate on the moon. Now, if there's no direction, if there's no spread for the moon, if there's nowhere to go from there, I would probably go to a different planet. But you can see that there's a lot of contact this moon has across the chart. Aspect-wise, what it's doing here is it is sextiling Venus. And so we have this sextile between the moon and the feminine Venus. So we have this lovely connection between the Lord of the midheaven, which is the moon, and the Lord of the ascendant, which is Venus. And this is part of her artwork and also part of why with Yoko, some of her best work was in collaboration, was working with somebody else, whether it was a musical collaboration, working with another musician, whether it was an artistic collaboration. It was about what brought out the best in Yoko Ono was meshing her work with another medium, but with another person with different ideas. So she worked best, even though Saturn is conjunct the Venus, and she believed that she was better on her own doing these things. She worked so much better when she worked in collaboration with other people. So we've also got another two angle lords here. So this sextile brings in the moon, the Lord of midheaven, the Saturn, the other side of the midheaven, the IC at the bottom, Venus, which rules the ascendant. So we have this connection here between all of them. And we also have a sextile on the other side to the Mars, which is the moon is 11 degrees and the moon is approaching Mars at 15 degrees of Virgo. So we have this sextile, this square between the mutables. So we've got contact here between all of these four lords. And this is a very active chart if you're going to get that. If you're going to have, you know, all these lords contacting each other and having relationships and conversations with each other, then you're going to have a lot of activity. You're going to have a lot of movement here, and you're going to have a lot of results and a very full life and a lot of choices for this person to go one way or the other. So that connection between Saturn and Venus and the connection for the moon and the square to the Mars. Yes, there are difficulties here, and probably this is part of the discontent between Yoko and her mother, because we've got a square not just to the Mars but also to the Neptune. So we have this kind of, you know, boundaryless kind of sometimes aggressive relationship between mother and child here, and a competitive kind of thing. So we have a very traditional mother on one side, and we have a child who is breaking into the world and doing all the things, and in some ways, as much as I'm sure mother was happy being traditional, there's also, when you see Mars and the moon connected, there's a little bit of envy sometimes. There's a little bit of, you know, if I was born in this generation, I might have a bit more freedom. I might have the ability to do some of the things that you do. I might be able to express myself differently. All those sorts of things can be part of that Mars moon. And when you've got the Neptune, there's always this little bit of a clanging kind of disharmony between who's the parent and who's the child? How do we define the roles? Are we relying on each other too much? Are we kind of expecting and projecting images onto each other? All these things are potentially there when you've got the relationship to the moon and the Neptune happening. So you've got those sort of things. You've got the moon sextiling the lords. You've got the moon also sextiling the ascendant. So it is part of the relationship between the ascendant and the descendant. So not only do we have the Lord of the ascendant connected to the moon, but we have the ascendant itself. So we have this moon as a very, very active moon. I know that we often talk about the moon as the third house, as being the house that is about my local environment. It's communication. You know, it's kind of this idea that the third house is a place of where I wander around and I'm very familiar with it, and I take short journeys, and, you know, and nothing too untoward happens or nothing too surprising happens because I'm very familiar with this space. Okay, that's true. But the other thing that the third house is very important for is that even without the moon there, the sign on the third house, particularly in whole sign, and even here in Placidus, we have a sextile between the ascendant and between the third house sign. So we have Libra on the ascendant and we have Sagittarius there. We have Libra on the ascendant and Sagittarius there. If I'm going to talk about all my physical skills in the first house, this is my body, this is how I move around the environment, this is how I understand where everything is and how I put forward what I want, how I imprint on the environment, how I change the world around me. I know that if I have a connection to the third house, I have certain physical skills. I know that I can move through the world and I'm going to be all right, and I can do things that are so unconscious. This is where we have the idea of the third house being the acts of the unconscious. It's not that you're unconsciously communicating, it's the fact that you've learnt patterns that you're not even thinking about. You're not even thinking about how you drive a car when you get into a car. You're not even thinking about how you eat when you pick up your knife and fork, or whether you know, the ways in which you put your life together, which foot you put the shoe on first. All these sorts of things are third house things because we've learnt them as children. We struggled with them when we were children, and then usually by the time we're 5, we know all the things we need to know about how to feed ourselves, how to find a toilet, how to ask for food, how to ask for a jumper if we're cold, how to express to the world what is it we need to feel comfortable. So when we find the moon in the third house, it's in its house of joy here. It loves the third house. It says, I'm pretty good here. I can use my skills of my body and my moon and my emotions and all these sorts of things without feeling as if I can't express myself. Even the moon in Moonkite is still in its joy in the third house. So not only do we have the connection to the ascendant Lord, the connection to the ascendant, the connection to the descendant, but I also have the connection to Mercury. And Mercury is not in a great state here. It's in the 5th house here of my creative world in the Placidus. But because it's in Pisces, it's going to move to the 6th sign in the whole sign. It works in both. So this idea of her Mercury being connected to her moon, and the moon is 11 and Mercury is 7, so it's quite a tight aspect. I have a square here. So this is about her ability to express her emotions in a way which is unusual. This is a Mercury which is unusual. This is a Mercury that we see is in detriment, but it's in the sign of Jupiter. And we have a kind of a negative mutual reception between these two. Jupiter doesn't want to be in Virgo. Mercury certainly doesn't want to be in Pisces, but they're each other's keeper. And they might not be great at it, but they're each other's keeper. So they will look out for each other and they'll tend to each other. So her Mercury gives her a way which is confusing, and it causes some issues sometimes, and it causes a flood of emotions because Mercury in Pisces will do that. And it's a very big planet because it's with the North Node, and the North Node makes it a big planet, but it still works for her MC. It still works for this connection to the ascendant. It still works for this one over here, and what we have in opposition between the Lord of the 7th house and the Mercury over here, 7 to 15, or 9 to 15, or to 7. So the Neptune is closer to the Mercury, but that gives her also that creative world, that spiritual world, that place where she can withdraw when things are too hard for her, when perhaps mother's words are too harsh for her. Then that Mercury withdraws into the Neptune, and it finds a creative world, and it finds a world of imagination, and somewhere that it can feel safe and come from there. Okay. I know that we are going to keep this short. I know that I don't want to keep going with this, but I do want to show you why I think it's so important and why I want to cover this when we do it, is why is it so important to watch the sector of planet? And I know again that you have done Fedara, you've done Fedara courses with me, you've done Fedara courses with Cecily and the other lecturers within SATA, but I'm going to make you good at this. I'm going to show you how to do this. So what we're going to do is with Yoko Ono, this is the division. This is, we get numbers, we get dates, we get a whole influx, a flood of information with Fedara. But then we can start breaking it down and saying, okay, I'm going to put this over here so it's not in the way. Okay, what if we were to break down these 7 periods into blue star for childhood, brown star for the low points, pink star for the romantic associations, success is red, revival when I come back, creative collaboration with others. And this has been very much the story of Yoko Ono's life. This childhood, her moving from Japan to America without her father. She didn't meet her father until she was 2 years old because he was working somewhere else and she was living somewhere else. So we have this idea that her childhood was very much impressed on by her mother. Her mother and the servants, her mother was a very busy social woman. She didn't see much of her except for the direction and her education of, she had to have piano lessons when she was 4 years old. She had to learn the language when she was very young. She had to learn not just the Japanese language, but several dialects because that's what her mother could do. She had to learn instruments, not just the piano, but the traditional instruments. So this was a very intensive time about being directed by mother, but more about being directed by mother to be the perfect child than to be a child. She was brought up by servants. She rarely saw her mother. She might have seen her for an hour a day. So her loving, caring people were people who were employed to care for her, to see to her needs, and not necessarily to give her love and to give her support and to give her security. So straight away we know that moon, which we've already said, is in a state of moonkind contention. Already we have kind of 9 years where this child feels like she's abandoned by the mother, or that mother is a stranger. Now what we get is Saturn comes in. So this is the second period. Now her mother and now 3 children. There's a brother born and there's a sister born. These 3 children moved from America back to Japan because we have the years of the Second World War and things are starting to get very hostile in America for anyone born with a Japanese heritage. So we have the idea that they're in Tokyo, and I've put the low point in here because these are the years, the 11 years of Saturn in this period, where they were in Tokyo, where the war was on, where after Pearl Harbor, Tokyo was being bombed constantly. There was not enough food. The buildings were collapsing. 100,000 people died in a short period of something like 6 months. It was horrific. And her mother gathered her children, her 3 children, put them in a wheelbarrow, took everything that they could and marched for miles up into the mountains in the hope that they would survive up there and that there would be food and there would be shelter. But the mountain people, there wasn't enough for them. So we have this idea that these were periods, this Saturn period for Yoko Ono was a period of being hungry. It was a period, it lasted for about 2 years. It was actually in the Saturn-Mars period here where there was not food, there was not shelter. And it was terrifying for this child to be in a state where all the things that the moon would need are being taken away from her. This is 2 marriages here in the Jupiter period. Her first marriage when she moved to America. Her second marriage after the first marriage collapsed and she returned to Japan and she was in such a poor state. Now remember that this is the Jupiter which is retrograde. This is the Jupiter which is in square to the moon. This is the Jupiter which is in detriment. And what happened to Yoko Ono was that she couldn't cope with the collapse of her first marriage. She married very young. Her parents didn't approve of the man that she chose. And she thought that she could find refuge if she returned to Japan, because that's where her parents had, her father had retired, and she thought that she could stay at her family home and just recuperate. But she had such chronic bouts of depression that her parents convinced her to make them her legal guardian, and they, against her will, they put her into an institution. And they wouldn't release her. They wouldn't let her go. They wouldn't, yes, she looked like she was going to stay there. And she sent letters back. This is, again, Jupiter in Virgo. She sent letters back to America, begging for help, her help back there, her friends back there. And eventually a film producer came to Japan, smuggled her out of the institution, put her on a plane, flew her back to America with him, and she married him. So this was the second marriage. And we have a relative amount of success then. She then starts to put all that energy into what happens into her, into this performance art. And this is why some of her performance art is so jarring. It's so confrontational because of these experiences. It's very, very hard for her to deal with this because of what's happened before this Jupiter. The Mars period is John Lennon's marriage, the collaboration with John Lennon, the low point where she has a child with her second husband. This is the marriage here in Jupiter. In the Mars period, he smuggles the child, a daughter, away from her. He cites a judge. He tells a judge that she was in depression state, and he saved her from Japan, therefore she can't be a fit mother. And he disappears and he goes into a cult, a religious cult, and she doesn't see her daughter for years. So we have this low point here, but we also have the creative point where she comes back. The green one is the revival. And she comes back with John Lennon, she collaborates with him, and she sees success. So we have all this sort of idea that we can look at these Vidarias, and I know that we have looked at these before, but we're going to focus on them a lot more as we go through this process of what we're doing this year, because we've got time to do it. So we will do this in the sessions that I record. We will do this in the live sessions, and we'll look at people's charts and then take them through this process of predictive. There's no way in traditional astrology that a practicing astrologer would not have gone from the native to the predictive. And this seems to be a bridge that doesn't happen in modern so much. There's almost this sense of, we're just going to talk about your chart and that's the end of it, we're done. But in traditional work, you couldn't do one without the other. It was like being blinded. So this is one method we will use. We'll use others. But as you can tell, I'm very passionate about this, and I really want my students, any students, to be able to do this, to be able to look at the chart and be able to process the information and then take the information and put it into this level. The other thing we're going to spend time on is we're going to look at combustion, and not just what combustion is and how to identify it, but how do you delineate it? And this is something new that I've been working on. And we'll also be going through checklists like this that says, okay, this is how we do Fidaria, but this will relate to the natal chart. So please join me. I'm very excited, and I hope that you will join me. Thank you very much. Bye.